Alrighty, hello everybody. Welcome back to another Fossil Creek class here, a little webinar. As always, my name is Jackson. I'm the retail manager here at the store, and today I'm really excited to talk to everybody about growing some citrus. And citrus is one of those things that just is really, really nice to have around the house as far as just aromatics, as far as the fruit, of course, and it also can help just kind of add some character and get some oxygen flow in your house. Not to say that you'll have this unlimited supply of oxygen, but definitely a great plant to incorporate into your home as a house plant, as a fruiting plant, and a really good kind of mix of something that you can grow inside but is still technically a fruit tree, so you can always have this kind of production. So let us start with just kind of some basics about citrus, and then we can start talking about care and year-round kind of culture surrounding it. So to start, citrus is a genus of plants. Of course, there is a larger family they are a part of, Rutaceae, but the genus citrus is what we're going to be focusing on very specifically here, and that incorporates, of course, your limes, your lemons, grapefruits, oranges, kumquats even, all these different woody plants in that citrus genus that are all hybridized to be the limes, lemons, grapefruits, oranges that we know here today. So, in the Front Range of Colorado, you can actually grow citrus outside. It is something that throughout the growing season, if the temperatures aren't getting close to freezing, or I would even say closer to kind of that 40 degrees if they're not acclimated to the outside, you can effectively grow your citrus plants outside. In fact, they really like it. They grow outdoors in the ground in other southwestern states like, Arizona, New Mexico, really any place that doesn't have these hard freezes and is kind of has that more arid, dry climate, and of course lots of sun. Citrus love the sun, and they really don't mind it being dry either. As long as they have a source of water, they are extremely happy. But there are plenty of people who grow these guys outside, and they can do that up to a certain point. Once we are past our last frost date in sometime around May here in the Front Range, it is appropriate to start putting your citrus outside. Now, if you've already had your citrus inside, again, regardless if it's a grapefruit, a lime, a lemon, an orange, any of that, if it has been living inside and you're deciding to put it outside, do not just throw it directly outside. You're going to need to acclimate your plant, and I had another class about frost protection, and a lot of those same principles are going to be incorporated here into this class, especially with the fact that if you take something that's been getting a lot of diffuse and not direct light inside, throw it right outside, you're going to get some burning, and you're going to see your citrus start to defoliate. And that is because your citrus, and all of your plants in general, if you bring them inside and they start growing well indoors, they are acclimating to that environment. Because there's less light in there, the leaves themselves have developed mechanisms and different chlorophyll patterns to not necessarily be taking in, absorbing, and being exposed to as much direct and intense light as, of course, the outdoors are. Which is another reason why it's very difficult to bring things like shrubs or trees. Like, a lot of people like to purchase live Christmas trees and bring them inside in their pot, use it as decoration for Christmas, and then put them back outside. A lot of times that's not suggested, just because if you eliminate a lot of that light, if you bring it into forced air, you're essentially taking a plant that is so used to the airflow, the UV intensity, the drought, and the soil outside, you're taking that inside, and it's a completely different environment, and more than likely you are going to see a lot of things defoliate. You're going to notice an increase in things like mites, spider mites, and other little insects that may be present but are being kept at bay by outside insects, or the fact that it's cold outside, so they're essentially gone dormant, but you bring them inside, they'll start up again. And if there's any pathogen on the plant, if you're bringing it inside, sometimes that could cause issues as well. But that's why I would not suggest bringing Christmas trees and outdoor conifer into your home for longer than a couple days. But we're talking about citrus. So in that same way, A lot of people will grow their citrus outside, they'll bring it in, but once you bring it back out, which is what I was sort of talking about, you need to make sure you're acclimating it. You cannot take a citrus growing inside and put it directly into a west or south or even east or north facing exposure. And that is purely because you will start to get burned leaves. They become so used to being inside, and it's just going to be a big change. It's like you have lived up in Alaska your whole life, and then one day in the middle of winter you decide to go all the way down to, let's say, Mexico. You're going to get burned pretty bad. I mean, more than likely you'd be whiter than I am, and you'd just get a lot of sunburn because you yourself and your skin have acclimated to that lack of light by, of course, changing some of that pigmentation. There are people that, of course, I mean, if you live in that kind of high sun area, going around, you're not going to get sunburn as likely. But same thing with plants. Plants can get sunburn. So, if you are bringing your citrus outside, it's important to, if it's going out into a high light area, west-south side, bring it out a couple hours at a time. Per day, per week, but just make sure you're giving it a little bit exposure so it can understand what it's going to be getting into and start to develop more chlorophyll and more defense mechanisms to take that amount of light. Once you finally do get it to the point where it's acclimated, you still might lose some leaves, but you will be pushing out a bunch of new growth just because the amount of light is going to be so much more intense and a lot better for production of new leaves, new foliage, and of course fruit. So, care of citrus is also very important. It's important that you're knowing how to bring it in and outdoors, but how do you take care of it when you're in that kind of situation? Well, once you've acclimated your citrus to go outside, you're going to need to water it a lot more frequently. It's a lot hotter out there. It's arid. It's the Front Range. We're essentially a high desert up here. There's not going to be a whole lot of protection, so you're going to want to make sure that you are giving it an even amount of water fairly frequently. One other thing about the citrus is since it is a woody plants can, or most, at least that we grow around here, woody plants cannot handle consistent wet feet or quite a lot of water. Your citrus is a woody plant and it needs to dry out in between waterings. And that is going to incentivize your roots to grow. It's also going to allow them to take in water as they need. Woody plants, of course, will develop woody roots and can rot very easily if you keep things wet constantly. And quite the opposite is when you're bringing your citrus inside. So say that you've had a citrus, you've been watering it, every couple days outside in its pot, and you're deciding, okay, well, it's getting cold, I'm going to need to bring this inside. You need to make sure still that you're letting this plant dry out in between waterings. Very, very important. Because in the same way that bringing it outside is a big shock, bringing it inside is going to create a large shock as well. It's just going to take a little bit more time for your plant to really tell you what's exactly going to happen. So, if you are taking your citrus, I have one over here, that's why I keep doing that. If you're bringing it inside, give it a deep water, but again, very, very, very clearly make sure that it is drying out in between those waterings. And that would involve taking your citrus, taking your finger, the best water meter that we can buy, sticking it into the soil, and then seeing if it's dry or if it's wet. If it's wet, leave it alone. If it's dry, give it another water. Now, water isn't the only important thing when bringing your citrus inside or bringing it outside. It's also going to be the amount of nutrient and fertilization that it's going to need to continue its normal processes. Now, if you are bringing your citrus inside, you need to make sure not only to let it dry out, but you need to give it as much light as possible. Again, citrus are light-loving plants. They love the heat, they love the light. So if you are bringing it inside, don't put it in indirect light. Don't put it over in a corner where it's going to be forgotten. All of its leaves will drop off if that happens, and essentially you're forcing it into dormancy. You will see some dieback, but that's another way to do it. I'll circle back to the dormancy. But if you want to keep it alive and growing, you're going to want to give it as much light as possible. Now, why would I want to keep it alive and growing when I can just make it dormant and put it back outside later? Well, a lot of citrus are going to be blooming in February. January, February, March, some a little bit later. It's all about the amount of light you're getting, but around the end-ish of winter, right going into the beginning of spring, but there's that odd period, that's when a lot of your citrus are going to start to bloom. And of course, your blooms will eventually turn into fruit. This takes a very long time to develop, which is the other constraint that we have when growing citrus here in the Front Range, is that while these fruits are very desired and they're, of course, delicious because you're taking care of them well, they take a long, long time to develop. They can take anywhere from 3 to 9 months, depending on what kind of citrus, what kind of care, how much water, how much light, but it can be a very long time before you can see a flower become a fully developed fruit. Now, the more light you can give it, the more water, of course, it's going to need, and the more frequently and effectively you can harvest fruit. But it is important to know that it will take a while for them to develop. So if you are bringing it inside, outside from season to season, that is a good reason why, is to continue your fruit development. Alternatively, if you did not want to care for it, you didn't have the room for it, you had to put it somewhere where it didn't have any light or got just a little bit cooler. Again, we don't want any hard freezes, but if it was a little bit cooler, less light, you can essentially force your citrus into dormancy. It would lose its leaves, but again, because it's a woody plant, it would act very similarly to any of your plants outside, in which it would lose its leaves, harness some energy, and then it would, of course, pop out once you start to bring it out in the summer. Which actually is a good way to kind of forego some of that acclimation. If you have a dormant plant with no leaves on it and woody stems, of course you would still want to acclimate that plant when you're bringing it out for the next season, but you don't have to do so as much because there's no leaves or stem tissue to really get burned. So something to keep in mind. The other thing I'd like to talk about with citrus is, we talked about those blooms and fruits, you gotta fertilize. Fertilization is gonna be very important with citrus. A lot of times, you'll buy them in soil medias like this. Very chunky, very porous, with a little bit of fertilizer in there, but there's not a whole lot that you can provide just from that mix and just from what is present in that pot. Refreshing the soil from year to year is going to be important to encourage more of your organic nutrients in whatever potting media you use, and then supplemental fertilization from either small beads like this, which are going to be a slow release fertilizer, or a water soluble fertilizer, which is in a granular, or even, could you hand me one of those root stimulators? Shout out to Liz handing me the root stimulator. Liquid fertilizers are also going to be important. Now, this one is a root stimulator. We suggest this for quite a few outdoor plants upon planting to help with establishment, but it is also very effective in giving a high middle number phosphorus into your plant's hormonal and daily procedures, essentially. Sorry, I was scratching my eye. But it is going to be incredibly important to fertilize, especially when it does start to bloom. The more high phosphorus, again, that middle number, that you can give these, the better. It's going to encourage more blooms, more fruits, and more roots overall, which are really the things that we're desiring here. Now, if you buy your citrus plant when it's very small, this one is actually a pretty decent size. This is a number 5 pot. But if you buy one that's a little bit smaller, it would be important to purchase a fertilizer that also has a high first number. This one's 4 compared to that 10 second number. But that first number is going to encourage leafy top growth. So if I'm giving a small plant a lot of nitrogen, that first number, encouraging a lot of leafy top growth, it's going to help it later on to produce more fruit. Once it is a more mature size and better established, that's when you can start with your high phosphorus, because it's going to start encouraging all of our wonderful fruits here. Another thing to point out is when your citrus does start producing fruit, it will put a lot of energy into producing that fruit and not a lot of energy into producing any leaves or other foliage. So a great example is this one I have right here. You can see it has a stake up to the trunk, which is keeping it in place and holding it together. It has 1, 2, 3 fruits on it. It actually had 4 before I ripped that other one off. But you could notice the lack of foliage on this one compared to this guy. Now, what's up with this? Well, like I mentioned, once things start to bloom, once they start to root, and once they start to produce fruit, it's going to put a lot of energy into that and not a lot of energy into your top growth, which is why producing that leafy top growth, giving it some high nitrogen initially is going to help you later on, because it can produce a bunch of foliage, branch out more, get more stems, get more blooms, get more fruit. So it's a process, and it's a year-to-year process. Caring for a citrus is like caring for a houseplant that you love, or a tree outside that's producing fruit for you, a shrub, a perennial. It can go a long time and can live a long ways. So, talked about a little bit of acclimation. We talked about the citrus genus and how pretty much all of those fruits, limes, lemons, grapefruits, kumquats, blood oranges, regular oranges, are all part of that citrus genus. They all have individual species, but most of them have been crossed and hybridized to get to the point they are today. But it is very important to know how to acclimate, how to water, how to fertilize, the culture overall of what you're going to be doing with your citrus. The fact that it is a woody plant and needs to dry out in between waterings. Give it as much light as possible when indoors, and make sure that you're up to date on the fertilizers. These are also really nice to smell as well. And fun fact, the leaves will also have a citrusy smell, not just the fruit. But proper pruning on a citrus is also important to give it some shape, give it some density. Again, the more that you prune some of these guys, the more it can branch, and eventually the more flowers and fruits it can get. But give it as much light as you can. Give it as much light as you can. Make sure it's drying out in between waterings. And definitely make sure that you're giving it some fertilizer about 3 times a year. When it starts to bloom in the spring, again, like really early spring, it would be important to give it some high phosphorus fertilizer to encourage those blooms and roots and fruits. Once we start to get into the growing season a little bit more, giving it a little bit of nitrogen mixed with some phosphorus is going to encourage a lot of leafy growth, which could eventually help you out as far as the maturity and ultimate survival of the plant. And then a good another dose of phosphorus when we get into fall. Maybe a month or so before you start to think about bringing it in, which again is when our temperatures start to go closer to freezing. But if you're seeing a nighttime temperature that is like kind of the high 30s, low 40s, it is definitely time to start thinking about bringing that citrus in. So, talked about a little bit about citrus and the care and the culture, bringing it inside, giving it some fertilizer. Does anybody here have any questions about what I was talking about today? Not going to be an especially long class here today. One more thing I would like to mention, very important. All of our citrus here at Fossil Creek Nursery are currently 30% off. And that could mean anything from this lemon here. I got a bunch of grapefruits. I have plenty of oranges in there as well. But all of our citrus here at the nursery is 30% off. So if you stop by, I'd be happy to tell you more and get you out of here with a nice citrus plant. And if that's going to be it, guys, I wish you all a wonderful day, and see you next time.